Ida? Ida, no Ida. Jennifer? I'm sorry, somebody said something and it broke up.
That was Tara, but I put her on mute, so Tara's here.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then we said no Ida. Jennifer Isle, I believe, has a substitute today. Is that right, Trace?
Ida?
No, Jennifer Isle.
Oh no, she does not. She does not,
Okay,
but she's not here.
great. Leanna. Zane.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nate. Adriana.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lori.
Good morning.
Hi there, Gina.
I'm here on behalf of Gina.
Yes, hi. Introduce yourself to us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Cole. I'll use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Outreach and Policy Associate at CICASA. Gina couldn't be here today, so she asked me to join you all by proxy. So nice to be here with you all.
Thank you and welcome. Shauna. Chris.
Good morning.
Good morning. Michelle Murphy. Margaret. Okay, Sarah. I thought I saw Sarah.
Here.
Ah, there she is. Hello. Rashawn. Great. We have a proxy as well. We'll have you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Soledad Diaz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Public Policy Director for Violence Free Colorado, and I'm here trying to fill Roshan's shoes.
Great. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome. Casey. Kathy Wells. Hello. Donna.
I'm here.
Good morning, Donna.
Good morning.
Kelsey. Jade is not here today. I know that. And Aletha. Okay. And Jill Cohen is with us. She just joined. Thank you, Jill. Great. I think that's my work here, Trace, on that. Moving on, friends, to the documents.
Stephanie?
Yes.
Hi, this is Kelly Sim from Casey Family Programs. I am also a substitute for Crystal Ward Allen. So I'm sitting in today. I apologize for not being on camera. I upgraded to Windows 11 and now I have no camera. So
Great to have you. Thank you for your introduction as well. I'm glad you're here. And then I see Leanna joined us as well. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the two documents, we have meeting minutes and meeting recaps from May 22nd, 2024 meeting. I'm going to just start with the meeting minutes. All of you should have had an opportunity to review these. They were in your packet of materials. Are there any additions or edits we need to make to the meeting minutes from May 22nd? Okay, Kevin is going to abstain. Thank you from voting on these. Great. I think we have a few there. Kevin, Zane, and Jessica. Thank you both, or thank you all. All right, fantastic. I see nobody has any corrections. If we could have a motion and a second to pass those meeting minutes, please.
I'll move to pass the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Chris. Can we have a?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there anybody who has an objection to the passage of those meeting minutes? I see none, so those meeting minutes will pass. Thank you. Same process for our meeting recap. Are there any additions or edits that need to be made to that meeting recap again from May 22nd? Okay, I see none. Again, if we could have a motion and a second to approve that meeting recap, please.
This is Michelle Dossie. I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Michelle. Can we have a second, please?
This is Kathy. I'll second.
Thank you, Kathy. All right. Is there anybody who objects to the passage or the approval of that meeting recap from May 22nd? All right. I see none. I think we're good to go. Thank you all.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right. Good morning, all. And good morning to our our proxies. Thanks y'all for being here. And Kelly, thanks for being here on behalf of Crystal. Appreciate folks' attendance. I'm going to jump us into today's meeting. We're here for a solid 3 hours today. So excited to just jump in to some rich conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, kind of catch us up to date of where we've been, where we're headed. And give me 1 second. All right, so just a reminder for folks that we did knock 2 meetings out in August and September. We just don't need them. We kind of overplanned, which was our goal. So you should have seen that reflected in your calendar, but I just wanted to remind folks there. Again, reach out if you have any questions on that. Second is we're entering into phase 2 of our subcommittees. So we wrapped up our subcommittees and our subsequent recommendations from phase 1, and we're moving into the next 4 meetings of subcommittees. So the first 3 will be actually in your subcommittee, and the 4th meeting will be us all coming back together to review the work of both subcommittees and to kind of wrestle through things together as a larger group. So I really appreciate the folks that gave us feedback on which group you preferred to be in, and especially the folks that said, I'm down for whatever group. So appreciate the flexibility here. So the 2 subcommittees that we're going to be moving in starting today, specialized occupation subcommittee is going to be with me, and we'll be sticking in this main room, and the data subcommittee will be with Doris, and you'll be going to a new link just with the challenges of recording. Then you'll all come back to the main group at the end, as always, for public comment, and we'll get you out of here right on time as promised. So the directives that you're going to be following today in your subcommittees are bolded, but I wanted to make sure that you understood the full list of directives that each group will be working throughout the course of these next 3 meetings. But the ones in bold are the ones that we're kind of hoping to tackle today via a mix of panel conversations, discussions, and review of resources. Any questions here before I talk about who's where? Okay, cool. So, and then before we break out into subcommittees today, Brian's going to overview the broader resource that he has been working on, and just for the purposes of the full group. And then we'll be breaking out into these subcommittees, but I do want to go ahead and give you a heads up where folks are. I know there might be a couple of people online that are not placed yet. We basically placed everyone that said that what they requested, and then we wanted to see just who showed up attendance wise, and then try to balance out the groups as best we could. So if your name's not on here, just drop a note in the chat so that we can make sure that you're placed accordingly. But I know Doris is on the back end working on that. So here are the subcommittee assignments. Folks in yellow are with me, specialized occupation subcommittee, and folks in blue are with Doris, and you'll be going to the other link. So I'll just give everybody a minute to review this. And I'll also bring it up in a minute after Brian's finished with his part, so that folks can have a reminder as we're breaking off into our breakout rooms. So again, if you don't see your name on here, we'll make sure it's reflected in a moment. We just wanted to make sure we had a chance to even the groups as much as we could. The other thing I just want to note is that this is, unless there is a big concern you have, or you're really just not digging me or Doris or something, this is where we're going to ask that you stay for the course of these next 4 meetings so that we can just really build some momentum together as a subcommittee group and really work through these recommendations in a rich way. So we're not going to have folks bounce around. So if after today there's a big concern, we could consider moving folks, but our goal is that once you're in this group, that this is where you're sticking throughout the next, 4 meetings. Okay, cool. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for now. Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you to school us a little bit on all the incredible work you've been doing. Brian is just an incredible policy analyst with CPO for folks that don't know him, our proxies and guests here. And it's done a really incredible job of putting together resources for this group and also codifying those resources for folks in other states to be able to utilize after the work of this group. So really just doing some really incredible research and analysis. And so Brian, just appreciate you a lot, and go ahead and hand it over to you to talk about the latest resource that folks can use.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, always appreciate the hype. So we have already, the CPO has already put out a database on mandatory reporting laws in other states, which we have worked through quite a lot in this group. We have just added something to that, so I'm going to put the URL for that in the chat. Folks can look at this, and I'm going to give like a very quick overview of these. You'll have more time to dig into these resources. Here, let me share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Y'all see my Chrome browser mandatory reporting page? Okay, so this is the database, same database page that we had previously, where we had these different maps that you can interact with. The new, one of the new things we have done now is this third paragraph here. The CPO has also created a resource that captures which groups in each state are required in statute to be mandatory reporters. To view this resource, you can click on it as a PDF or as a spreadsheet. So I'm going to click on the PDF to show you what that looks like. So this is a very long document. Don't be scared by the number 78, but many states like ours have a lot of occupations that we name as mandatory reporters. So what this does is it compiles them. I took the statute and I kind of simplified the language and tried to de-legalese it. And I made these alphabetical lists for each state on who is required in that state to be a mandatory reporter. So hopefully that allows folks, when they're looking at multiple states, to have an apples to apples comparison. But so for each state, you'll have this alphabetized list of those who are named in statute as mandatory reporter. Then you'll have the statute quote, so you can check my work and make sure you see the full context of what that means. And then the citation is given for where that statute can be found. And again, this is for all 50 states, which makes this a little bit of an unwieldy document, but I did these internal hyperlinks. So if you just want to know what Missouri is up to, you can click Missouri. It'll take you right there. And then if you're done with Missouri and you want to go back to the top, but you don't want to scroll all the way up, you can just click this box on every page that says return to the table of contents. So that's number one. That's a lot of information to take in, but I'll go on. And just that's the PDF, which I think is the most accessible way to look at it. But then we also uploaded the spreadsheet where you can really dig in and nerd out if that's what you want to do. Sorry, it's just loading. But if I bring this onto the screen, hopefully you can see that. So once again, this is just the spreadsheet that has all of the information, but this will allow you to do like filter and view. And then if you, this comment here has some information on just kind of the methodology and what I included and didn't include, but you can look at that on your own perusal. Okay, so that is who do states require to be mandatory reporters, which is an important block of this conversation. And then the next new resource we have is, so now that we know who's required, what do we know about states creating exemptions from mandatory reporting requirements? So you can come here and you can click this final question on the resource, and you have a new interactive map where each state is very different, so we didn't color code them. But if you click on, say, Montana, you can see, yes, there are exemptions. The clergy penitent privilege is granted. And then you get the quote from the statute with bolded sections on the relevant areas, and then the citation there. So you can look at just, you can click through these a couple different times to see what all, who all is listed as having an exemption from mandatory reporting requirements. And then, like the other interactive maps we have, if you click this additional info button, excuse me, I've written sort of like an overview essay that brings out some of the highlights and trends that we found. So like 35 states have an exemption for religious figures. 25 states have exemptions for attorneys. 5 states have exemptions for some sorts of counselors, etc. And then you can see a little bit about my methodology here. And then you can click to email me if you have any questions. But so those are all the new resources that are available on our public website. And then I'm almost done, but I'm not quite done. Let me give you one last thing to look at. So in the Mandatory Reporting Task Force Google Drive, which we should all have access to, and I'll drop a link to this in the chat, we have this research materials folder. If you open that research materials folder and you go to mandatory reporter occupations, this has basically the resources that are available on the public website I just looked at. But there's this one that we haven't put on our website, which is the Specialized Occupations Directives Policy Scan. So for the Specialized Occupation Subcommittee, I'm not going to go into this, I just wanted to show you. This is kind of a crib sheet for states that come close to what the directives are describing. So for instance, in Directive 7, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking, these are the states that I found in my research that might be of interest to folks who are investigating that directive in particular. And then you can use the other resources that have been given to find the citations and where these things live. But this is just kind of like a crib sheet to help you process all of the information I've already shown you. But so similarly, here's Directive 10 for attorneys, and then Directive 11 for victims of dating violence or sexual assault. And then
Hello?
I know, one very last thing, there's also an electronic reporting platforms folder. You click that, and then this is what we'll be talking about in the data subcommittee. This is a list of all the states that have online reporting platforms available. You can click on their links and play around at the website to see what it looks like. But that's already information overload, so I'll turn it back over to Trace, and then we'll have more time in our subcommittee meetings to delve into that detail. Trace?
Yeah, Brian, get a lot of love in the chat, so you should read that on a rainy day for yourself. Thanks, Brian, for that. And we are going to give folks time in subcommittees as appropriate. Obviously, data is different than data subcommittee might be different than specialized occupations, but we're going to give you time to kind of sit with this as well and really dig in. So appreciate that, Brian. And let's go ahead and get into our groups. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen again, and I'm going to drop the link into the chat for the data subcommittee. And again, if you don't see your name on here, just drop a note. This is the wrong slide. Here we go. Cool. So if you are in blue, go ahead and click that link. You're on the data subcommittee with Doris. Click the link in the chat, and we'll see you back here at 10:45 for public comment. If you are in yellow, you are hanging tight and you're with me. And we'll give this just a minute. All right, perfect. Looks like everyone got where they need to go. Addie on the back end, if you could just review those, and if you see anybody in the wrong group, just maybe send them a little nudge in the chat. All right, y'all. So welcome to the Specialized Occupations Subcommittee group. Excited to really dig into this with you all. We're going to be again in this meeting, in this group for the next 3 meetings, really kind of digging into these conversations. And then through the conversations and through recommendation kind of conversations that you will have, the 4th meeting will be back in the larger group. So really that 3rd meeting is going to be spent actually bringing together some recommendations. Woo, sorry, it's getting windy out here. And then the 4th meeting, we'll bring those back to the full group. So today I'm excited. I'm going to drop in again those directives that we're focused on. But what I would love to do is, we've been together for a long time, but we also have a few folks in here that are not typically in here. So I would like to just do a quick pop around as a reminder of who you are and what role you're in. Because I think as we get into these conversations, it's just a good, helpful reminder of who folks are, you know, what unique perspective they're bringing to this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to be on the back end So let's see, Kathy, I'm going to pick on you to just pick on folks around the room, if you don't mind, to just do a quick, again, name and role, so that we kind of know. And again, for our guests here, Anastasia and Soledad, just so that you all know kind of who folks are, as you kind of get into this conversation today. So go ahead, Kathy, I'll hand it over to you if you want to start with your introduction and then call on people, and then I'm going to drop the directives in.
Sounds good. Good morning. I'm Kathy Wells. I am a child abuse pediatrician by training. I co-chair this committee with Stephanie. And I'm representing the Colorado chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. My other hat, just for disclosure, is I'm the director of the Kemp Center and faculty at university. I'm going to go to Stephanie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Stephanie Villafuerte, and I serve as Colorado's Child Protection Ombudsman, and I have been in this role for a long time now, like 8 years, and I am also chair of this task force, and welcome. And I'll go to Jessica.
Good morning, I'm Jessica Daughter. I'm the Sexual Assault Resource Prosecutor for the Colorado District Attorney's Council, representing all 22 DAs. I just provide support, legislative policy work, training, sometimes data analysis, all the fun different things, anything sex assault and domestic violence, child abuse related for CDAC. I know Anastasia and Soledad well, so I'm excited to see you as temps for our friends that are out today.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll go to Anastasia next. How's that?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia. I'm subbing in for Gina today. I'm on CCASA's public policy team, and I'm our outreach and policy associate. And then prior to this role, I did work at a child advocacy center in grant management and special needs, so it wasn't in direct service, but I have a little bit of context there as well. And are we popcorning it? I can popcorn it to Kevin.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kevin Bishop. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm the social work coordinator for the Office of the Alternate Defense Counsel. And I'm here representing the Office of the Alternate Defense Counsel and the Public Defender's Office. And I will call on Kelly Sim.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly from Casey Family Programs. I am sitting in for Crystal Ward Allen, who is on sabbatical until mid-July. Just really excited to hear more about what you guys have been doing. This is a really critical area that Casey has been looking at as well. And just even the resource this morning, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is amazing what you've done. So I'll be sharing that widely very soon with my Casey peers.
Great, thank you. Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Menz. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in private practice, representing Southeastern Colorado, basically. I have worked in the school system for about 2.5 years. And so that's kind of where my background in working with kids. Also, I have quite a few clinicians working in the judicial system for youth right now. So therein lies that also to help with supervision.
Thank you. Soledad. And then Kelsey.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone again. My name is Soledad. I'm a public policy director for Violence Free Colorado. So yes, we work together a lot with Anastasia and have the privilege of having Jessica testifying so many bills together. So yeah, so happy to be here. Just for background, I have been working for Violence Free Colorado in this position for about 8 months. Before that, I served as a shelter program director in Boulder County, a DV shelter, where I had to work a lot with mandatory reporting with my advocates. I will also manage the 24/7 crisis line, so a lot of related work. And before that, I served as a bilingual legal advocate. I have a background in law. I'm originally from Chile. And I have been working very closely with the Hispanic community since I've been here. So I guess that's what I bring with me.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelsey Wirtz, and I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. I'm representing hospitals. I work at Denver Health Medical Center. And when I joined the task force, I actually was the pediatric social worker for 6 years here. And then I now am one of the hospital care management supervisors. So supervise a big department here full of 60 folks that consist of social workers, nurse care coordinators. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Kelsey. How about Jill and then Zane?
Good morning. I apologize in advance. My internet is terrible today, so if I'm on and off camera, hopefully I'll be able to catch up. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work at the Office of Respondent Parents Council. We represent indigent parents with child welfare cases in Colorado. And we have attorneys, social workers, and peer advocates in that program.
Good morning, I'm Zane Grant. I am also a licensed clinical social worker, and I am the director of CASA of Pueblo and 2 other CASA programs here in southeastern Colorado. I'm on the task force representing our CASA network of 20 court-appointed special advocate programs. I've been in my role for 22 years now, and before that, I was a caseworker working in child welfare. At our office, we've got obviously a lot of program directors and staff and volunteers that work with individuals and children in the child welfare system.
Great, thank you. How about Ashley and then Tara?
So hard to find the mute button on the phone. My name is Ashley Chase. I'm a staff attorney and the legislative liaison at the Office of the Child's Representative. We're the state agency that oversees attorneys who represent children and youth in dependency, neglect, juvenile delinquencies, and other case types. I've been in this role about 7 years, and prior to joining the OCR, I was a practicing guardian ad litem myself for a little over 10 years in Weld County.
Hi everyone, my name is Tara Dockstader. I am a parent advocate working with the ORPC. I'm somebody who has lived experience, and I work alongside defense attorneys for parents who currently have open dependency and neglect cases.
Thanks, Tara. Looks like Shauna might still be trying to connect to audio, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think her internet's out.
Okay, maybe you throw something in chat if you can hear this. And then Addie, I think, is last, but I don't know. Addie, you?
Yeah, I can go. I'm Addie. I'm with Keystone Policy Center. I'm taking all the minutes.
Perfect. Thanks, Addie. And Kathy, crushed it. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Super helpful. All right, y'all. So again, we've got 3 meetings, really 2 meetings to dig into the directives, and then 1 meeting to really kind of start saying, okay, so what you know, now that we've had all these conversations, what does this actually mean? What does this group want to do? So really excited to dig in both to the resources into the conversation day. I do have a question. Anastasia, is it Anastasia, right? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. And Soledad, are y'all with us the full time today?
I'm planning on it, yes.
Okay, cool. So if y'all don't mind, I want to start with the resource review before we get into the panel discussion. I also think it might be helpful for you all, just for some of the context, to dig into this resource. So Brian talked about, again, the resource and how it might be helpful to you, both for the policy directive piece, the state scan as well. So I'm putting the link back in here. A reminder that I think what would be most helpful is for y'all to dig into that in that 3rd paragraph, to dig into where it says the PDF, click here. Is this this is the right one? Yes. It's the 50 state policy scan, occupations and statute PDF piece. But what I want to do is I want to give you all time with this, with any of these resources. So you could use the map feature. You can use, I think through this document, it's going to be most helpful. Again, it's located in the 3rd paragraph there on the website. And I'll drop in a direct link as well here in just a minute. But let's plan on, I'm going to say 15 minutes, but I think it's somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes. So if folks want to go ahead and go off video. And then when you're ready to like rejoin the conversation, just come back on. I'll either stop us at 15 minutes or I'll stop us at 10 if folks are kind of done there. So any questions before I kind of send you on your way? Cool. I think this will just be a good grounding to kind of understand like where states are, what's happening out there already. And then we'll come back and we'll hear from Anastasia and Soledad as well from your perspectives. And we'll dive into really just a facilitated discussion and just start getting into some questions. So all right, y'all. Well, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, go ahead and head off video and we'll
Hey,
see you back.
Trace,
Yes.
could I ask one quick question? How do you get to the map that he showed earlier?
So it's down at the bottom when you scroll to the bottom and you see the specific directives listed out. When you click on one of those directives, you'll see the map kind of populate from there based on which directive you're looking at. So if you
From
go
the
to that,
PDF?
no, if you go to that website I just dropped.
Oh, sorry. Oh, it's a different website.
Yeah,
Okay,
go to the
gotcha.
website. So you can kind of do it either way, but I think the PDF is going to be more helpful to get to this specific information. But if you go back to the site, yeah, you go down and you'll see, at the bottom, does statute create any exemptions for mandatory reporting requirements? You click on that and you'll see the map populate and you can click by state.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, so it is 8:37. Let's come back a little after, let's do like 8:50 and some change. And we'll come back. All right, thanks, y'all.
Trace, you're on mute.
Wow, I've been going for a while. No one was gonna say anything. Thank you, Kelsey, for having my back. You wouldn't believe the thoughts I just made. All right. That's pretty funny. Okay. So what I was saying is that honestly, wow, I was on mute that whole time. That's pretty funny. I've never done that before. All right, this is the first time for everything. Okay, so all right. So what I was saying was Anastasia and Soledad are here as proxies. We were originally going to have a panel conversation with Gina and Roshan, and so they're going to step in today and kind of present overall. Thanks, Kathy. Present overall their thoughts and responses to this directive, to really just kind of understand where are you all on this topic. What are your thoughts as kind of in your particular position as, you know, advocates in the various roles that you are, and what do you want this group to really consider from your perspective? And then from there, we're gonna just jump into a facilitated conversation. We're really, and I just want to name, this is an incredibly personal topic for a number of folks for a number of reasons, and so just really want to hold space for being able to ask tough questions, disagree with one another, but also just try to understand each other's perspectives on this. And that's really what today is all about. So we're going to start with Anastasia and Soledad, and then we're really going to just get into what are your questions? What concerns do you have with the perspectives, or what support do you have for their perspectives? And let's just kind of really wrestle together in this. So that's the kind of the goal today. Any questions from you all? And Anastasia and Soledad, I really just want to get out of the way and give you both an opportunity to, you know, we'll give you kind of about like, I know we said around 10 minutes for each person. Obviously, folks jump in with questions as we go, but really then I'll kind of facilitate the Q&A afterwards. So any questions before I kind of hand it over to you two? Okay, cool. So I believe Soledad, you're gonna go second. If I put that. So Anastasia, I want to start with you. So again, just remind folks the organization you're with, kind of your background in this, and would love for you to just kind of have the floor on for this group's perspective, kind of where you all are sitting with this and what you're really wrestling with on your side, and then we'll move over to Soledad and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thank you again. I'm Anastasia. I'm here today on behalf of the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or CCASA. I am, as Trace said, stepping in for Gina today, so I've been doing some prep and kind of trying to get caught up with where you all are at in this discussion. And that said, I'm sure that there's a lot of context that I'm missing, and, you know, welcome any questions or, you know, dialogue. I will say, I would like to, in general, I'll share some thoughts around Directive 6, but I'm really excited to hear what Soleil has to share for that specific directive. I think, especially when it comes to safety planning, we're going to really lean on those that are really more involved with safety planning in intimate partner violence and domestic violence cases. After reviewing some of the statutes and also speaking with Gina, I looked at the task force, I think, initial recommendation drafts of giving mandatory reporters, I believe, up to 24 hours to report. And that's something, a discussion that is ongoing. And, you know, in terms of that, I think with where we're currently at is needing to really support advocates and having the time needed to do safety planning. And when it comes to, I think in this piece, our biggest concern is really, of course, child sexual abuse and children who are vulnerable to that or potentially going through that, to make sure that they are safe and have the resources that they need. And we're really supportive of giving reporters additional time to actually create that safety plan to make sure that families are safe and that the kiddos are taken care of, and that the supports are in place before taking those next steps. I think in terms of considerations, just in this conversation is just for us to remain mindful of some of our dual agencies that house SANE exams, that might also provide confidential advocacy services, and recognizing that often there's going to be a different reporting requirement there. In terms of potential recommendations for the group to consider, I know this has been a topic that has been discussed previously in this group, but we really strongly advocate to have advocates exempt from the mandatory reporter requirement, and especially when it comes to child sexual abuse. We've seen in other states, including Oregon, that don't require advocates to be mandatory reporters, but they have policies in place at the agency level that help provide direction and guidance for advocates in special situations like that. So, you know, of course, just because someone is not required to report doesn't mean that they're not going to, doesn't mean that they can't. If they know of, for example, child sexual abuse. And so I'll speak to that a little bit more when we get to Directive 11, but you know, we would really like to see advocates exempt from this. And I'll know it looks like it might be one more state from what you dropped in the chat, Stephanie. But we're one of the very few states that does require advocates to be mandatory reporters. And so we are an outlier in this area. It's not uncommon to have this special exemption. And so that's something I'm sure that will continue to come up as we have these conversations. And I also just want to mention, you know, in terms of creating internal policies for responding to suspected child sexual abuse or other unique situations, we really feel that advocates are going to be some of the best in the best position to help support and create those policies because of their specialized training, because of their direct experience. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but you know, advocates are very specially trained in family dynamics, trauma-informed care, navigating systems, working with providers, and we really trust that they would be able to help create these policies, while also, you know, potentially, if needing to, fit within the statutory requirements with having a little bit of flexibility. And, you know, for example, an agency could have an internal policy that addresses what to do if the perpetrator of the harm is under 15 years old, or if they're, you know, in a position of trust, or they could say, hey, if this is child sexual abuse with a family member or an adult in a position of trust, you know, we need to call it in as soon as the safety plan has been established. But again, I'm really excited to hear from Soleil and her thoughts on that directive. I think where I'd like to spend most of my time is talking about Directive number 11 regarding a child or youth suspecting that a child or youth is a victim of dating violence or sexual assault. There's so many directions that we could go here, but I think with the time that I have, I'd like to speak to teen sexual assault when it comes to peers. I think that that's something that's often overlooked and not always considered when we're talking about mandatory reporting and the potential long-term impacts of that. We know that youth, especially between 16 to 17, potentially up to 18, that they have some of the highest rates of sexual assault, and they're 4 times more likely to be sexual assaulted compared to any other age group. And despite them having this extremely high rates of sexual assault, the number of teen survivors who disclose and seek services is significantly lower than the general population when we look at adults. And, you know, one thing to mention is that unlike younger children, youth are most often harmed by a peer or an intimate partner, although they can certainly, as we know, be harmed by adults. It is more often than not going to be at the hands of the peer or an intimate partner. And when it comes to our current statutes, you know, mandatory reporters have to report any sexual abuse of a minor, and that, from my understanding, includes teen-on-teen sexual assault. And since, you know, the Department of Human Health and Human Services doesn't deal with reports unrelated to family situations, those reports are going to go directly to law enforcement. And that can be very traumatizing for youth who don't want to engage with law enforcement. And I'll say that's even more so for youth who have already been, you know, systems or justice involved that might have had negative experiences. You know, often youth will disclose to like a family member or a friend, but that does increase the likelihood that they're going to, at some point in their journey, get connected to a mandatory reporter like a therapist, an advocate. And it's really important that that youth is able to build a relationship and feel a sense of trust with these adults that they're speaking to. And you know, when they disclose in the rare case that they do, and then they come into law enforcement without wanting to, you know, a lot of times we hear that they feel betrayed because that's not the choice that they've made for the experience that they've had. And you know, it opens a lot of potential, you know, in terms of not being believed, being shamed. You know, unfortunately, in many circumstances, families are not supportive, and you know, there can be fears around retaliation or getting in trouble, depending on, you know, the circumstances of where they were at when the assault happened, and you know, potentially having backlash from their community and their peers. I'll also share that, you know, 2 of our member programs who work in schools, they don't do advocacy services in these schools, but they do comprehensive sex education. They both shared on separate occasions just how difficult it is when they know of a teen peer sexual assault, and that they need to report because it breaks that established relationship that they've worked really hard to build over time. And you know, when it comes to room for improvement in this area, I was doing some research for this, you know, and I was surprised there's not a ton of studies, honestly, about specifically youth seeking post-assault care. But one of the only studies that ask adolescents about post-assault services found that 95% of participants said that they would seek services after experiencing a sexual assault if confidentiality was guaranteed. And then later in the study, it went on to explain that that number plummeted down to 50% when asked if they would seek those services if a parent or caregiver were notified. And so that really stuck out to me. And if, you know, of course it's a study, but if we apply that to Colorado youth, that's, you know, leaving out 45% of kids and teenagers who need services and support that potentially might not seek that out of fear of unintended consequences of that disclosure to a trusted adult. I think, you know, it's worth noting that in Colorado, depending on the age group, and I know it depends on the agency as well, but teenagers can be too old to receive services at child advocacy centers, and then they're in an awkward position where they're too young to receive those confidential advocacy services, adult advocacy services. And so, you know, they either have to disclose without a guarantee of confidentiality or refrain from disclosing and seeking services altogether. And we've heard that across the board, you know, especially working with teenagers, having folks just really communicate clearly, hey, if you tell me A, B, and C, I am going to have to report. And, you know, in a lot of cases, that does ultimately discourage that person from sharing with that mandatory reporter, which again can, you know, hold them back from seeking services. Without, you know, access to services and support, youth, and I'm sure this group really knows this well, you know, they're more likely to struggle with mental health issues like PTSD, anxiety, depression. They're more likely to struggle with substance abuse, develop disordered eating habits, struggle with academic performance and physical health issues. So it can really snowball if youth don't get the support resources that they need, especially you know, after the assault has happened. A lot of studies have shown that there are significant positive experiences can help mitigate the negative effects of this type of trauma, while, you know, negative experiences can make them worse and exacerbate them. So, you know, in my perspective, and I think the perspective of CCASA, is that, you know, we need to make it easier for youth to access resources and support without fear, shame, or blame that often results, unfortunately, when they lose control of who knows about their assault and who their story is shared with. You know, we really feel strongly that we need to give youth more autonomy over their disclosure and what happens after they share that. You know, these are such formational years that can really set someone's trajectory for the rest of their life. And it's really important that we help them feel a sense of control when often they feel like that control and autonomy has been taken away through the assault that they've experienced. I know that we all share the goal of connecting them with resources and support. And, we think that giving them this autonomy would increase the chance that they would seek out support in the first place. And I will also just mention, I was doing some research. I learned that, we allow youth to make choices about their mental health in Colorado, starting at 15, and reproductive health at any age. There is, with abortion services and things like that, I do know that there's required to notify parents in certain circumstances. But, historically, we've been moving towards giving youth more autonomy, and doing that would also align with those decisions. So again, for our recommendations, I'll just re-emphasize, we would like to see advocates exempt from the mandatory reporting requirement, so that youth have at least one trusted adult that they can disclose to and seek support from without fear of peer, legal, or parental involvement. And I will mention, advocates already hold privileges for communications with certain victims, and making this consistent would honestly make their lives easier and help support them in doing the work that we all know that they do best. And then just as a final wrap up, and I don't know if this has been discussed before, but I did want to mention it. I think it's worth considering giving mandatory reporters more broadly discretion in filing a report based on the survivor's age and their relationship to the perpetrator after assessing the situation in terms of immediate danger and the need to intervene. With this approach, a mandatory reporter might not have to report a teen sexual assault if the survivor doesn't want to engage with law enforcement, while still being required to report all instances of child sexual abuse where the perpetrator is an adult, a family member, or in a position of trust. And in New York, for example, teen sexual assault by a stranger or a peer does not require a mandatory report. And it only becomes a mandatory report when the assault is committed by an adult, a family member, teacher, or in a position of trust. And I also found that in Oregon, which is not one of the states that requires advocates to be mandatory reporters, they also strongly emphasize and have really comprehensive policies on when they call in reports, especially as it relates to child sexual abuse and teen sexual assault, similar to New York. So that's where I'm at. And I would just like to, as a wrap up, just to emphasize, I think, as I was thinking through this, what just kept coming back to me is like, what is the cost of youth and adolescents not feeling comfortable coming forward and seeking help at this time in their lives? We're all on the same page that mandatory reporting is important. We want to keep kids safe. We want to make sure that they're not harmed and have access to resources. And at the same time, we have to, sit with the reality that many teenagers and youth will not seek services if they don't have a confidential way to do so, and that we need to give them more autonomy. So appreciate the time and look forward to talking with you all more today. Now I'll pass it over to Soleil.
Yeah, and Anastasia, I'm going to jump in real quick because I think what might be helpful is to stop and focus specifically, now that I'm hearing you, on this particular directive. And Soledad, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that as well. But I want to make sure, but before we jump into this other, let's not even touch the other directive right now. Let's just focus on this one, because I think I don't want to get folks kind of lost on where there might be unique reflections or questions or whatnot. So I appreciate, Anastasia, you kind of focusing in on Directive 11 around reports involving children and youth who are a victim of dating violence or sexual assault. So I just want to say, and then Ashley, I see you have a question too. It sounds like, I'm just trying to like summarize for folks a little bit where you kind of outline these like kind of key concerns, challenges as it currently is. And then you kind of had two, really one clear ask. I think the second one, I think, is more the reflection on discretion in filing the report, which is a broader conversation that this task force is tackling. But for purposes of today, I'm going to keep us kind of honed in on this reporting, involving the children and youth, and we can kind of go from there. So I kind of distilled it into 4, and I'm curious, Anastasia, if I'm missing it as far as like a key reflection of challenge. One is these reports go directly to law enforcement. So that's a factor. Two, teens feeling lack of agency, right? Like just age appropriate. You mentioned like where they do have agency in these other kind of reporting environments and their own ability to decide for themselves around mental health and reproductive health and those sorts of things. So that's another one. Three was threatening the relationship and trust with the advocate. So like you have this one person, there's someone who you really trust, who you have a deep relationship with, and this just goes directly against their ability to feel like that person is someone that could actually truly listen. And then four, the kind of cuts off the access to resources for teens who most need them. So because of the threat of that relationship, the advocate who could then say, here are some resources I think that you actually might really need, they are no longer getting access to those resources because they're not telling anyone. So is that or is that like an accurate distilled version of like what you're kind of presenting as like the key things to consider as you go into the ask of removing advocates as mandatory reporters? And it sounds like that's the full stop recommendation from you, which is not like, so increase the time of when we report. You're just saying, just take us off the list fully. Am I getting clear on what you're asking for here?
Yeah, thank you. I think you did a really good job at summarizing that. The only note I would add with the last point that you brought up is that, one of our concerns is that it not only limits teen survivors' ability to get resources initially, but really in the long term of their lives. Because if they have a negative experience with law enforcement, they feel like that trust has been broken, that can really just snowball into systemic trust issues, and I think lead down the road to, as they grow and develop, also not seeking services because they've had that initial negative experience during that really key developmental period of their lives.
Yeah, appreciate that kind of clarification there. So Soledad, I want to give you the opportunity, and Ashley, do you want to jump in now, or I'm going to give Soledad an opportunity to like just this particular directive, so we're not going to lose sight of this. Do you want to jump in now?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I just maybe missed something at the very beginning. I thought everything, Anastasia, that you brought up about the teens and the services and stuff made a lot of sense. Maybe I just wasn't fully dialed in at the beginning, but I think I got confused about, you were talking about something about needing more time to do safety planning and connecting families. And I thought that was more to do with like small children, which to me feels very, very different. And so I don't know if that's a different thing that we're not talking about right now, Trace, or not, but I was very confused. Or I think I lost the point of that. I think because I kind of bought into everything else that came after, but I was confused about what you were talking about first. So I'd love some clarity on that. Or maybe, Trace, that's for a later conversation, and that's okay.
No, Ashley, I think what you're saying is like, can we get clear on the age ranges of what we're talking about and how that might be impacted in these different situations, circumstances potentially? Or is Anastasia like, are you considering ages in this broadly? Is that kind of what we're getting at here?
And I think Anastasia, you mentioned it sort of at the end, and maybe that's it, that to me, the teens and everything you said makes so much sense. The thing that feels a little different though, and I don't know how your agency interacts with it, is like the small children who maybe are being sexually assaulted by a parent or somebody in the home, or, and that does feel like something more appropriate for like a report and CPS involvement and things like that. So I guess I just want to get clear on the recommendation so I understand it from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry about that. So going back to Directive 7, so I did spend a lot of time focusing on the teen sexual assault piece, which is, and that discussion is primarily under Directive, I believe, 11. Going back to number 7, again, I'd love to hear Solei's comments, but I think in general, what I was trying to say is that we're supportive of allowing a little bit more time for safety planning, even with cases of child sexual abuse, because we feel like family safety is the number one priority in that moment. I will say just in general, I don't have as much context around that discussion, so I would lean on others' expertise in that area. But, with Directive 7, I think that we're still in a place where, we feel like advocates should be exempt. And with instances, and we totally agree with you that, if a kiddo is being sexually abused, there needs to be intervention, something needs to happen, and a report does need to be made. And what I was trying to say is that, you know, if advocates are exempt and they learn about child sexual abuse, that doesn't mean that they won't report on that. I think that a lot of agencies should have internal policies for what they do specifically when they learn of child sexual abuse, to where they still would report, but would kind of have, I guess, flexibility when it comes to other things, including teen sexual assault. Is that a little bit more clear? Okay, thank you.
Soledad, I want to turn it over to you.
I'm sorry,
let's-
Trace, I was a little late in getting my mute button. Can I ask one more question of Anastasia around what she
Yeah,
just
please.
said? Just
Yeah.
as an idea, and you may not have an answer, Anastasia, at all, but you just said that you feel like agencies should have policies. Do you feel like that needs to be kind of outlined maybe in statute? If we're gonna have a conversation about exempting, do you feel like then we need to have a conversation about, you know, whether or not there needs to be something outlined in statute about creating policies, so that way at least there's some level of consistency around this topic?
Thanks, Zane. I appreciate that question. I'll say, I would have to take that back to my team and get everyone's thoughts, but my initial reaction, and I kind of was thinking through that a little bit in preparing for this, is that I do lean towards having some sort of guidance for consistency's sake. I think it could be challenging to just say, here, you're on your own, do your best. I think that having some framework could be potentially helpful, but I think that that would, you know, warrant a bigger discussion on who helps create that framework, and making sure that we do have advocates and folks on the ground giving input to that framework.
Thanks, Zane. So Soledad, sticking kind of in this lane a little longer, if you will, and then let's kind of open it up more broadly. So again, reports looking at Directive 11, reports involving children, youth who are the victim of dating violence or sexual assault, and keeping in mind, you know, what Anastasia already said around kind of what we distilled down into these kind of key concerns. Like, what would you add, or what would you really double down on? What do you want folks to really hear, also from kind of your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. So we fully support what Anastasia is presenting. And I want to bring the conversation to the practicality of it. Like we can have the conversation, it's like, oh my God. But if you go to the practicality of it, when someone reached out to a victim advocate, something had happened in between. There's a referral, there is a pamphlet, a flyer that someone saw in a bathroom. I'm thinking about like high school kids. And when they reach out to an advocate, they're seeking help and support. In that seek out of help, we cannot fail. When we challenge that trust of and I'm going to say again, like in a very specific example, when we challenge that trust is lost not only in that particular advocate or in that particular program, is lost in the system. So I'm not reaching out again. I'm not talking to anyone again. I'm not going to my counselor ever again. So I think that we, in our case, I say we victim advocates, we play a role of building trust with a survivor that might, you know, help build a bridge with the system and like a law enforcement report maybe, but at least we have that person. We can connect them with more resources. We can provide counseling. So we can provide an intervention or help in a trusted manner. My concern is that when a teenager, and again, going to the case, right? Like when a teenager reach out for help and we fail and we challenge that trust, there's so much more lost. Now, usually there's more people around. It's not just the advocate. So I really want to focus on like victim advocates and how and where and when we do our work. Victim advocates get connected with survivors when a survivor reach out for help or their parents. We don't get involved just because, like we're not walking around and, oh my gosh, I was in the grocery store and someone said the DV and I had to report. No, it's when someone reach out for help. So I think that's one of the things that I would love for us to keep in mind during this conversation is that specifically for victim advocates, we are, if you want, an on-call situation. Someone reach out to us to ask for help or to ask questions. Usually, and this was true for the crisis line, the most common calls from teenagers that we got was someone asking, you know, my friend is going through this. Do you think this is abuse? Do you think he will change? So it's not even like a direct ask. And what we do in that first connection is try to build trust so that person either calls again, or we can have a longer conversation, or we can engage them in services. So again, like my hope will be that we can separate that, right? It's different from school counselor. Like that I think is an entire different conversation, and we can have a different perspective on that. For victim advocates, I think it's critical to be responsive in that first reach out for help and to build trust on that. And sometimes like that trust leads to a survivor feeling comfortable reporting because I'm not alone, because someone will go with me, because there will be someone else with me when I tell my mom what happened to me. Because the minute I call the police, I'm going to have someone that I already trust that believed me, that's going to be challenging what I'm saying, sitting with me, and I can engage in this process in a safer way for myself. So I think, so that will be my thought on that particular piece.
Yeah, and Soledad, I appreciate that. It sounds like you're also calling for folks to remember that it's particularly in the case of a child or youth, you're naming also that it's the adult potentially advocating on behalf of that youth as well and their trust of the system. So you're a parent calling because you have a concern about someone that your child has interacted with. So there might be situations. It sounds like that's just a different thing that I'm hearing called out too, that it's not just the kid and their trust of the system, but it's also the potential family member or the the trusted family person for them that is also interacting with the system. All right, let's pause on this again, honing in on this particular directive involving children and youth who are the victim. And I want to hear from folks. I mean, so the one thing I'm hearing, Ashley, and I want to make sure I'm understanding from your perspective, like one kind of question is kind of age difference of the potential, and like, are there different considerations? Is that what you're getting at? Or
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
mean,
Like, what?
I don't even know if I would say it's age so much as like circumstance. I just feel like when you have, and I would say younger children for sure, so it is sort of age, younger children in a familial sexual abuse situation, that to me feels like one of the maybe few times when most of us would agree that is when CPS does good work and like it should be involved, and that interaction makes sense. And so I just want to make sure when we're talking about like a victim's advocate who might see several different types of victims, I think a lot of what both Soledad and Anastasia said makes a lot of sense to me. And there are some circumstances when I think it's important. I also will just be super frank. I am a firm believer in you don't have to be a mandated reporter to report. So I'm really open to these conversations. It just feels that one little sort of situation feels a little different to me. That's all. And again, I'm coming from attorney for children who are abused in the system, right? So my perspective is a little bit skewed in that way, I'm sure.
Well, we're gonna hold that one as kind of one piece, but want to open it up to folks. What thought, I'm hearing Ashley and Zane, your reactions around like, yeah, this makes a ton of sense to me. Want to hear some general reactions from folks. Stephanie, go ahead, and then we'll keep going from there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add beyond what Ashley has said. I think that I guess my question would be, and I was busily trying to look through these statutes from other states that you mentioned. What would be an advocate's approach? Let's just say you are a counselor for a domestic violence victim. And in the course of that conversation, right, there's a disclosure of one of my children was physically or sexually abused by their father, who's a perpetrator. what do you do or what do you hypothetically think should be done in those circumstances? And what are those age cutoffs? If you have thoughts on that, because that's the piece I'm just trying to wrap my head around. And I agree, the rest makes a whole lot of sense to me in terms of, trying to, especially when youth get older in their teens. So if you could help me understand, what would you think that protocol would or could look like in the law? If at all. You may say it doesn't fit and we still don't want to be exempt, and I respect that.
I can take that one, I think. So again, and I want to share my perspective as a shelter program director and having that situation happening to me all the time in the shelter. Usually what happens when we report in shelter is that the advocate will make the report. The mom is in shelter, is safe, is seeking help, probably trying to get a protection order, probably trying to get transportation for the kids to school, probably trying to set up like a stable situation for the next 6 weeks, not even month. And at the same time, we're pushing and working on housing solutions for that survivor that left the abusive partner, that seek help, that is connected to resources, right? If at that time I make a CPS report, I'm bringing the system into the shelter, and the person investigated is the mom in shelter who did all the work. And they won't go to dad to ask, what did you do? If they were to do that, we're exposing that family that escaped, that is safe, that is trying to get a protection order, everything that I said, and they have to go together to talk with the CPS worker. And then most commonly, the abuser will say, I have no idea where they are. I have no idea what happened. And usually the CPS worker will say, don't worry, they're in a safe place. They're going to school. Okay, so abuser learned. So they're still here. They're going to school, so I can see them in the morning and the afternoon. I can follow them and figure out what they are. So even then, I think that as I want to say as a society is a very big word, but there are other places where that support can happen. I think, again, with the victim advocates having to make the report, we're exposing the survivor to more harm, and we're exposing the children to more harm, and we're interfering with the stabilization of the family. So in my perspective, like what I would love to do is for advocates not to have to report. If there's abuse, believe me, like the system is already involved because the kids were in school and the counselor, the teacher, someone else make a report. If we bring the system in, again, we're challenging that trust instead of working with them. And I have to say that my work was in Boulder, where CPS is a different world, and we work collaboratively, and they, it's like a very different thing. But I know for sure that in other counties, the situation is very, very different. And just the thought of being investigated by CPS when you're not, and I'm going to say this with the most love and respect, when you're not a white English-speaking woman, is the most scary thing you can do to a person. Engage CPS for an immigrant mom that doesn't speak English. Engage the family with CPS when there is a Black woman that knows that a systemic racism have been playing against her their whole life. And again, I'm bringing the system in. For a non-English speaker, the CPS worker, not always, I mean, I can tell you maybe one or two speak Spanish, but then there's so many challenges around them that is not helpful. And I had several cases where we had to make the report, we were mandated to make the report, and CPS show up, first interview, next morning mom flee, and we never heard from them again.
So just to clarify, and I'm sorry, and then I know others have their hands up. So you're suggesting that, again, there should be no report at all required. And I think this is the last piece, and that if there was an allegation of child sex abuse or physical abuse, that other system players could report that to the extent that those allegations become known to them. Is that your argument?
Yes, and one of the things that the way that I train my advocates is that when we had to make a report, when there's abuse happening, we will support the parent to make the report themselves. Yeah. And that possibility, as I think Ashley said, like you can always report. Like you don't need to be a mandated report to report, right? If that is happening, I mean, for sure, I will report. But knowing that I'm not mandated to report every little thing that might constitute abuse in that context. I think the sexual abuse is a little bit different, right? But then again, you can support that parent to make their report themselves in a way that feels safe for them, or providing, I guess, more resources around that report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Soledad. Jessica, and then Chris.
Thanks. Like I said, I have worked with Anastasia and with Soledad and with CICASA and Violence Free, and I knew, you know, we talked about this kind of issue in the past, in policy changes and ideas in the past. I think that they're all like valid concerns. It makes a lot of sense to me with the teens being a specific, you know, above 15, having specifically, you know, taking more into consideration their age and some of their maturity and some of the agency that, you know, they are currently provided, that we want to encourage them to have over their choices, their bodies, all of that. I think it also makes a lot of sense that the connection with the advocacy program or the advocate then can, you know, come under peril and be threatened when that agency is particularly against, you know, that report is against what the teen actually wants to do. I do have, of course, you know, representing district attorneys, and I'll just say it, right? We have a very paternalistic role because we work in this world where we have to wear a hat of what's best for the community and not necessarily what the survivor wants. And that's very different than advocates and other people on the mandatory reporting list. Other roles, therapists and professional counselors, all work in very different areas where they are sought out for that kind of help. I think more so than necessarily law enforcement and DAs. And I mean, part of that is because I think that there is such a divide between the community organizations and the systems, to the extent that there's not trust between the community organizations and the systems. And, you know, whereas like we work, and I love working with specifically Violence Free and CICASA in order to build more trust there, in order to build bridges there. I think some of the fears and worries that district attorneys have, prosecutors have, certainly is, well, if knowing that is a huge, that advocates are a huge source of help and aid for survivors that they do feel most comfortable reporting to, then losing that connection between that and the public safety aspect that the criminal justice system can provide is very worrisome for us, right? Because that suddenly takes a whole, you know, a whole pipeline of information about sexual assaults and sexual abuse and cuts it off from us if we were to just remove victim advocates. I think about it almost in like a, you know, a supply business type thing, right? That's an easy way for me to analogize it, is that the supply of information that would allow us to do our jobs best is suddenly taken. So I put that out there for that perspective. I also think that I'd be interested in learning more about this idea of what if we were to modify, you know, the statute to allow to remove the mandated reporting aspect when it is over 15 to 18 and there aren't, you know, immediate physical abuse or it's not a trusted adult or things like that. That Anastasia mentioned kind of a couple of examples there of where there might be more leeway in removing the mandatory report. I think that's an interesting thing to consider because that does still maybe allow for some of the worries that we've all expressed. And I think we all agree with that young children need to be protected, people who are being abused by their you know, family members, by people in positions of trust. If there is more significant violent, I'm not, obviously sexual assault to me is violent, but when I'm saying like physical harm that could be in play to require reporting in those instances for those ages 15 to 18. I think that that'd be an interesting thing to discuss more, to really consider. One other, or a couple other things are that popped into my head while we were talking are that when we're talking about the way the different statutes are written across the United States, there are, I think Stephanie put in there, I think there's 8 specifically states that call out victim advocates and require them to be mandatory reporters. I wouldn't necessarily agree that that makes Colorado an outlier. And here's kind of another aspect of it is that most of those states do have mental health professionals, social workers, therapists, psychologists, and generally counselors included in their mandatory reporting list. While they might not call out victim advocates specifically, most of those types of roles exist in, I think, in victim advocate agencies, or I'd be curious to maybe know more about that. So I'd be, you know, when I think about the statutory construction, if we were to just remove advocates, then is a mental health counselor who's working in an advocacy program and providing services, well, are they counted under that victim advocate removal, or are they still having to report? And then my brain kind of goes to, okay, then when the advocate connects with resources, they're likely to connect them with mandatory reporters. So are we really solving for that harm? And one thing for sure, we're solving for the harm of the trust with the advocacy organization and keeping that confidentiality and keeping a safe place. I think that is certainly one thing to consider and to root for. The other thing, though, is it kind of passing the buck onto those other resources where it's, well, you're safe with me, I'm going to direct you to this therapist. This therapist is going to be a mandatory reporter. So it kind of just shifting that, I don't want to say passing the buck, but, you know, kind of, that's the best way my brain can think about it. So I think those are just the things that I think about. I also looked at kind of the history of when, and I'll throw this out there for people to just consider, that when victims advocates were added to our mandatory reporting statute, I think it's notable. It was 1995. A lot has changed since then with what we know about trauma, with what we know about survivors and how they seek help. A lot has changed with what we know about, you know, why survivors don't feel comfortable reporting to, and why they choose not to report to criminal justice systems. So in that sense, like, it's a bit outdated, right? That we have that requirement for advocates in there. They did include a legislative declaration in that legislation when they added it. And it's generally, I can send it out or I'll include it in the chat, but it's generally, you know, it was the purpose of, at least in the 90s, was, you know, sex assaults are a huge public safety issue. Sex assaults victims are often not believed. We need to have advocates. I think what the point of it was, with their declaration and their intent, was they wanted to add advocates because they felt like there was a need for a psychological assistance that advocates provide, right? And providing that support throughout the process to be given to survivors to help encourage them to report the crime. And so I guess I'll just kind of put that out there for what it's worth, right? It's outdated, but the General Assembly certainly felt that there was a reason for it. And I think that reason still does exist. I feel like I would feel a lot more comfortable, and this is not to discredit the work that our advocates do and our community partners do. I think if we did just have a better relationship, certainly DAs would feel more comfortable with discretion being given. I'll be very honest, my fear, and I know this because I'm the one that tells victims that the criminal justice system is not built for them. It's not, it's built to protect the rights of a person accused so that the government does not have that unwielded, cannot wield that unfathomable power against people without necessary process and evidence and all of that. I'm the first person to tell a survivor that to please do not expect, to be healed by our system. But I also, I think that advocates do that as well. And I think that that's fair, but there is a concern, I think, from the public safety side that the, messaging would probably be to not report because of how harmful the system can be. And that hurts because we work so hard. And I think DAs work really hard and police work really hard to be better at having trauma-informed work done and all of that. So I guess I'll just end on that. I think it's a very worthy concept and there's lots to discuss, but those are some of my hesitations.
Jessica, appreciate that. And we're going to take a break here in just a few minutes. Just because we've been on almost 2 hours. I want to hone in on this, not for the rest of the conversation, but just I want to pick out the age piece that you brought up, because I just kind of saw some head nods and head tilts and whatnot. And I'm just kind of curious, Soledad and Anastasia, like, what are your thoughts about that? Obviously, anytime you talk about policies where someone's asking for this and someone's saying, what about that? It's like, is there what are your concerns? Do you have concerns around that sort of being a middle ground of some sort of exemption expiration, which is like more on the age piece being a factor? Like, what are your thoughts on that? And then I just kind of want, and then let's kind of pause, Chris, if that's okay. I don't know if you want to, and then we can come back, and because I'm guessing you kind of have a different point, unless it's on this particular point. And then we can kind of come back and jump into these additional questions. But Anastasia, Soledad, just kind of curious, like, what are your thoughts about that? Because it's come up a couple times of like, I can see why this makes sense for like teenagers. I'm struggling with like kids, and Jessica, you threw at the age of 15 to 18. I'm guessing that's just kind of like a off the top of your head. So let's say for the purposes of this conversation, we would defer to experts on the more developmentally appropriate age, and maybe that is 15 or maybe it's 13, I'm not sure, but let's say whatever that age is in that range. Anastasia and Soledad, what are your thoughts around something like that?
Thanks for that question. I think it definitely warrants a larger conversation. But off the top of my head, I do think that, being more open to having an exemption or allowing folks to have discretion with teenagers, I would say starting at like 13 to 18, that would be the direction that I would go in. I'd be certainly open to hearing arguments or, studies that might back up a later age. I do think though that, 13 years old, you're like in what, 6th or 7th grade, pure sexual assault certainly happens in those situations. And I don't think that just because they're in middle school that they shouldn't have that autonomy to decide if they want to go, as we discussed earlier, to be in contact with law enforcement. I'll just share fully transparently, like, I am also a survivor, and I had one of my experiences in my teenage years. And I can just really affirm that, confidentiality is key. And that I really do think that at 13, although there's lots of developmental things that you need to go through, I do think that you're ready to decide if you want to engage in law enforcement and to determine the best course of, seeking services, seeking help. There's definitely more to be explored, especially as it relates to intimate partner violence. But I'll say, especially with teen sexual assault, that's kind of where I would go. I do, in general, like the idea of having some parameters around age, because I agree, if a child is being sexually abused, especially by a family member, especially by someone in a position of trust, I think that warrants a completely different conversation. And, to Jessica's point about public safety, and I saw Zane's comment also about, people reoffending. We know, especially with child sexual abuse, that many times the offender continues to harm, especially if they're held accountable. So I think that those are two separate conversations, but I'd be, definitely open to exploring folks' thoughts on the specific age ranges.
And Anastasia, thank you for your vulnerability and willingness to share. Just really appreciate that. So thank you. Soledad, what are your thoughts there? Just on this kind of age piece.
I'm going to defer to Anastasia's answer. Like we're very careful not to step into each other's toes, and I think that's the expertise on sexual assault is on CICASA's. For us is DV, and we are supportive of each other. So I think I, as a mom, that I can answer that as a mom. I have 4 kids. Well, they're not kids anymore. 1 teenager, 2 teenagers left. I think 13 is an appropriate kind of developmental age. If we were kind to look at that as a guidance, I guess. And also as a mom, I think it's important to have certain backup, if you want, from the system, because usually parents missed what's going on. What you see is the reaction, the behavior, the reactive behavior to abuse at home, and you start kind of this guessing game of what's going on, what happened, until maybe the child is more comfortable disclosing somewhere else, and they can get the help they need. So, I'm open to support that, absolutely. Again, and Anastasia kind of honoring her.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for Soledad for that. Just want to make sure I'm not leaving you out of that, but I hear that you're like, listen, that's Anastasia's expertise. So appreciate that. Anastasia, do you want to respond to that? And then let's take a quick break and kind of and Chris, unless your comment kind of is on this particular age piece, if not, then let's kind of hold it and we'll come back if that's okay. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in with one more thing. And again, I know this warrants a larger discussion, but one of the things that had got brought up is specifically with mental health professionals. And I think that especially the piece around discretion and reporting timelines and whether they need to report based on the age and the relationship with the perpetrator. And this is me not having spoken to my team about this yet and having gotten their thoughts, but I mean, honestly, in my initial response, I think that discretion piece would be great for behavioral and mental health professionals. I think that if a youth survivor say that they've come to their family and they're like, this happened to me, I want help. They get in to receive services for that. I don't think that provider, in all honesty, should have to report if that family and that youth has already decided to seek services on their own. I think that it's important for them to have that autonomy, and especially if they're that young seeking those services, it's important for them to have that, be able to trust that provider and disclosing and to build that relationship so that they can receive the treatment that they need to heal from the trauma they've experienced. So I'm not advocating for like an exemption for also behavioral and mental health folks, but I think that discretion piece could be very helpful, especially with situations like that. And again, I do think that there's a difference between that teen piece and then child sexual abuse. I just want to add that before we pivot.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks so much. So let's take a break. I know Soledad has prepared kind of her piece on the domestic violence side of things, and I want to be able to pivot we've got a lot of, we've got a lot of things to kind of mark here as like to return to and continued conversations. By no means want to stall out. I think there's a lot of questions, a lot of things we're wrestling with, but want to make sure that we're using both of your time on your kind of expertise and what you want to highlight, and then we'll keep digging in the future meetings. So let's take 10 minutes, and we'll come back. And Soledad, we'll start with you when we come back, and we'll kind of pivot squarely more into your space. And then at the end, if we have some time, we'll kind of bring things back together, full group. All right, so let's come back at 10:05. All right, thanks everybody. All right, let's go ahead and bring it on back. We're gonna shift into Soledad in this other directive, but Chris, I want to give you a chance to kind of wrap us up if you have any last thoughts before we move on. Again, we'll come back in this next meeting as well.
Well, I really want to say, really appreciate the perspective both of you brought on this. I live in a heavily migrated community in rural Colorado. And we have in our schools, we have a safe to tell program and all of that. Basically, I tell a friend and the friend tells an adult, or we can make those calls or whatnot. But I also recognize too, we also live in a community, particularly in migrant areas. And I know that maybe this isn't solely migrant domestic violence, so I don't want to categorize it all in that way. I think that couple of the things that I noted on here was that when we started this, one of the first people said that stuck in my mind is that we should not be about, people think about CPS or about mandatory reporting and they think we're calling to take your children away. We should be more supportive services. And so I think our job is to make that narrative change on all sorts of levels. And that would be also at the victims advocate level. We're not here to hurt the situation more. We're here to help. And granted, I get that every situation we could be as black and white or as clear as day on what the laws are going to state. And there are always going to be exceptions to the laws, always. There's just no way around it because it's not that clear. And resource wise, when you go into where I live, the resources are so limited. CASA workers are so limited. Advocacy programs are so limited, all of that. My concern and my worry is that if we're not reporting incidents based on a protected status of a client or who we're working with, does that then fall through the cracks? And we will then have another session where we're creating law or policy again based on somebody's name because it fell through the cracks. I gather there's a lot of, when we're dealing with youth, anybody of sexual assault or youth or domestic violence, there's a lot I guess there's a lot of things to concern, particularly safety and all of that. I can't tell you how many clients I've had alone that have a fictitious mailing list through Denver, right? Living in rural Colorado based on the domestic violence that they've endured or whatnot, or the protection. I'm not clear that limiting their abilities or giving an exemption is the right answer. I don't know what the right answer is, but I do, and I like the fact that, okay, they're in the system, and they want to start utilizing services as a 15, 16-year-old and all of that, that kind of goes along with mental health laws being 12 and older or whatnot. But if they choose not to, does that mean that then, you get this or that option? I guess, again, I feel like living in rural Colorado, what I've seen and what I've had come into my office or hearing the stories of my first gens, instances that have happened, the domestic, but like my first gens don't even want to tell me what's going on in their homes for fear of deportation and all of this, and yet it's huge. And so maybe the laws should change that, like, there's a safety net around this. It's not about like immigration. It's not about anything like that. Again, I just wanted to weigh in a bit. It's very different in rural Colorado, how these laws or these protections. And when you look at the child being able, even coming out or anything like that, it's very different. And who's hurt them, or a family of abuse that's been ongoing, or uncles or whatever, that's been generational or historical. I need the advocacy here to be able to report, I guess is what I'm saying. I need the advocacy to report to help these kids because they're so fearful at times that they don't have anything else. But I also recognize that our job is to help them work with the system and the system be supportive. I also recognize the system is broken. And so hopefully, again, that's why we're trying to move forward is systemically try and fix this so that all of us have something in here. You know, and again, I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on that. I really appreciate what you do and thank you for the time that you've come forward today. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think with all of us collaboratively, we can get a little closer. So.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I think the headline there is something that can be discussed within both of these directives and any directive, which is like anytime you're looking at the policy perspective, we're talking about Colorado, right? Like you're looking at those rural implications and urban implications, and that just might need to be something that this group just keeps in mind, regardless of which specific directive we're talking about, because we know at a policy level that, yeah, it does impact different communities differently based on resources, community context, all the different pieces. So the one thing I just want to make sure I say, because I didn't hear this from anybody, and this might have just been that you were kind of going and you let it slip out, but you said limiting their abilities. And I haven't heard anybody say that they want to limit anyone's abilities in being able to report. It's that they want to ensure that folks have agency, and I hear the word discretion. So I just want to clarify that, because I do think that's a really important clarify here of both in Anastasia and Soledad and any other comments I've heard. I don't think anyone's saying we don't want to take away people's ability to report. It's that we want to give them more discretion in when and how they report. So I did just want to make sure that we were clarifying that, and that might have just been the way I heard your words there, Chris, but I just wanted to make sure that I didn't hear that from either of that. So let me pause there though. And Soledad, I want to make sure we give you enough time and attention, particularly for this directive that I'm putting into the chat that kind of squarely puts us, again, there's lots of overlap here. Chris, your example is great, the urban versus rural, right? This we can equally, and there's a ton of overlap. And we also already talked about some of the overlap, but Soledad, I know that you prepared some material and kind of information for us. So I want to hand it over to you and give you the floor, and then we'll open it back up for conversation. And again, I know that some of the conversation kind of wrestles between the two directives, and that's okay, but we'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So I want to preface my comments with the following. So I am a Hispanic woman. I'm from Chile. I'm a person of color, super privileged. I went to law school. I work here. I directed a shelter program. I'm a director of public policy for the coalition. With that said, I can relate, and I think I can share with you some perspective from what does it mean to be on the receiving side of, receiving services side of the conversation, right? And I want to bring some awareness to the things that sometimes I see are missing when we're in this kind of settings and conversation. That being said, I'm going to put in the chat the DV counts report that is put together by the National Network to End Domestic Violence. We are part of them, and we participate in this count. And it's basically like a snapshot of one day in Colorado. So to put some context, and this is also not with 100% of participation of our programs. And I can say mostly because we don't have enough staff to, on top of the daily work, by the way, can you answer this question? So we're working to get 100% participation, but this is what it is. So in one day in Colorado in 2023, 856 DV victims were served. 262 hotline calls were received. That is about 11 per hour. I think it might be a little bit more. A program like SPAN in Boulder County, and I'm going to refer to that because that's what I know. We will receive about 1,200, 1,400 calls to the crisis line a month. So that's roughly, I don't know, 15,000, 14,000 a year. So it's not a little number. And also in one day, there were 187 service requests that were unmet. Half of that was request for shelter. So the context that I want to provide is that we're not talking about a few people. We're talking about, I will say safely, 1,000 people per day reaching out to community-based programs to seek help. So the other data that I wanted to add is that community-based programs in general, and I don't have the specific number, but in general, is between 40 and 50% of non-white population that reach out for help. So again, not small numbers. So I would say 50-50, in some cases a little bit more, a little bit less, but again, so the reason that I'm saying that is because when we're discussing policy and policy change and system change, we need to keep in mind who is going to be impacted by this. And I think that traditional marginalized communities are 50% of what we're deciding for, the people who are making decisions for. So just to say that, in preparing for this meeting, I was like, what is the challenge here? And I stick to the time frame question, right? So we are today in the immediate side of the time frame. So every advocate has to immediately report. What are the challenges with that? I'm going to read a quote, so we have some context also again, from a survivor. And she said, if I ever go to jail, I will get out and I will find you and I will kill you and I will kill whoever you are with. That's what my husband said when I threatened to report. I was really wanting to seek medical attention for my injuries, but I knew if I called the cops without a safety plan, I would be either sleeping on the street with my daughter or he would be there to kill me. That is something we hear almost every day. That's the reality that someone looking for help faces. We also know by data, right, that it takes usually about 7 to 8 attempts to actually leave an abusive relationships. But what I want to reflect on is how much time it takes for a survivor to make that first call. What had to happen for a survivor to make that one first call reaching for services? Finding the right time, maybe something happened the night before that, okay, this is it, I'm not taking anything else. Maybe the trigger was abusing the kids. Maybe the trigger of the call was like my kids saw when he was hitting me. Anyway, so what has to happen for someone to make that first call? And then from that first call to a crisis line, most of the time, it takes about 3 to 8 calls or contacts for that person to finally decide to look for shelter. With the numbers I gave you, I can tell you that when someone decides to leave, the chances of getting safe shelter immediately are very slim. We don't have enough beds for shelter in the state. The average is about 27 beds. Like the bigger programs, we have programs with 11 beds. So again, it's not like I call, finally, I want to leave. Where do I go? It's like, okay, we have to wait. And if in that first call, there is a report, that there is a need to make a report because we're mandated reporter, we're running against time. We know that we won't be able to find shelter, safe housing, or a solution for that person in the next 24 hours. We know that we're not going to be able to put that person in a safe place within 24 hours, right? Even if there is an arrest with, and when we know that if the police was involved, there is an arrest, chances are, I don't know, Jessica, you might correct me here, within 24 hours, they're out. Right? So even then, we can't keep that person safe longer than the time that he's going to be out, and we can't provide safe shelter, and there are no resources to put them in a hotel. So we're really really working against time and against the odds of having a safe place to offer to that survivor wanting to leave before the person, if there was an arrest, is released from jail. So when in a general situation, what are the factors that plays into the challenge, right? It's like, I'm going to lose my kids. You know, in an abusive relationship, you know that there's a mind game, if you want, that have been going on for a while. Like, this is your fault. This is not me. You're crazy. And then, of course, if you're confronted with the system, you're thinking, okay, I'm crazy, I'm wrong, I'm imagining all this, I'm gonna lose my kids, I'm not good enough, I cannot work, and all the components and all the dynamics that are into place in an abusive relationship. Now, what if there are guns in the house? And you know, with all system intervention, we think, okay, this is worth an ERPO, like an emergency. What is the name? High risk protection order, right? You still need at least for 24 hours to get someone that can file for you, to go to a judge, get it served, get the guns out of the house. So again, everything else takes longer than immediate. Every safety plan that we want to build to avoid all the extra risk factors are going to take longer than immediate, right? So with that said, I think the challenges are also, let's say there is an arrest. Let's say there is a restraining order in place. There's a civil standby. You have to be in the house. He's going to go there, take their belongings. Probably, if everything goes great, things are going to be smooth. If not, there's fear, there's re-victimization, there's threats, everything. Again, all this within 24 hours. And then you have all the other pressures, right? And again, from the survivor perspective. So you have the need for financial support. If you're not working, what am I going to do? What my kids are going to eat? Who's going to drive the car, etc. So we have all that. Now, as I was preparing to this, my mind went somewhere else. So this is kind of the general, we all know that we can have this conversation. But what are the other challenges of immediately when we have to immediately report? And I want to bring your attention to the following. So there's a historical charge, there's a historical pressure for Black and Indigenous survivors, because we know that there's systemic racism that they have been exposed to throughout their lives. So when we're serving a Black or Indigenous survivors, there is this layer of fear that is there. There is this level of distrust that is there. And bear in mind, probably they're English speakers. Probably they know the system or have certain awareness of the system. But they do have past experiences or someone that was engaged in the system and they were impacted by it. And again, I think just keep in mind systemic racism plays a big piece in here. And let's go to the other group, the immigrant population, right? Which we talk about as like a 50-50 kind of rate, probably. So things that play into the scenario are legal status of the survivor or the abusive partner. Sometimes legal status is the tool to control and coerce the survivor. There are cultural, religious aspects. There are a support system and community around them involved in the situation. Because I'm an immigrant, I have a few friends, I have my family and some friends. I have a small community that I trust. I go to church with the same people. And and they are invested in your life, right? So you have that pressure. Domestic abuse is usually a deportable offense. So you know that if the system gets involved, that if this person is prosecuted, it's going to be deported. And then I don't have enough financial support if the survivor is also undocumented. And again, the community and the family puts pressure on, like, why are you going to do this to everyone and get this person deported? It doesn't matter what they did. It's like you're getting that person deported. There's a lack of understanding in general of the legal protections available for them. There's lack of understanding and also distrust. And I want to kind of also emphasize that one of the biggest challenge that I myself experienced when we were having these issues in like situations like this in the shelter or in the crisis line is like, if I need an interpreter to effectively and safely support the survivor in whatever stage that can be living, reporting, and then navigating the interactions with CPS, I will probably never get a valid certified interpreter to be there in less than 24 hours. So the immediate reporting need, it's really getting in the way of even, fairly accessing, even if you're willing to engage, and I don't have the language access at my service, how do I safely and effectively engage with the system? How can I talk for myself if I'm relying maybe on an advocate that might be bilingual and actually, there are things we're missing. So everything that we can do for that survivor will take longer than 24 hours. So if we're put in the situation that we have to report immediately and the system needs to intervene immediately, we cannot safety plan around that survivor in an effective way. We can look for shelter. We can prepare for leaving the home. And again, when we're talking about advocates, and I said this at the beginning, we are connected. We're talking to a person that is reaching out for help, that they know they want to leave a situation, that they know that whatever they're leaving, they said enough and they reach out for help. Or they were referred to us by the law enforcement when there is an arrest, or they were referred to us by the school counselor or, a doctor, or, to say there was a referral. Okay, let's talk about safety planning. Part of safety plan, part of a safety plan is filing a protection order. So again, I'm from Boulder, so we can file a protection order whenever. So during the day, if it's before 5, you will successfully file a protection order and be heard that same day within 30 minutes. That's not true in other counties. Jefferson, you can only file between 7 a.m. and I think 10:30 a.m., 11 a.m. Broomfield, you can only file before 10:30, 11 to be heard around 2. If not, you have to come back the next day. Add to that, if I need an interpreter, so I have to file the protection order in English. I cannot file a protection order in Spanish. So I need to find someone that I can tell what's happening and they can write it. But then when the judge asks you, did you write this? Well, no. Who helped you translate? A certified interpreter? No, someone that was there to help. So there's so many barriers that are enhanced by the immediacy of the requirement for us to report. So language access is a big, big piece. So I guess my invitation is also to think, if we're still required to report immediately, if the system is gonna be engaging with the survivor immediately, how would that interaction be to a survivor with the barriers that I just mentioned? If someone is in shelter, there's fear, there's nervousness. They're like, am I going to be deported if I don't answer the right thing? There's lack of understanding, you know. I was shocked, and again, look at my privilege. We have a program in Southern Colorado that there are 3 advocates. I mean, there's the ED and 2 advocates. And one of them, she said, I'm bilingual. I was like, oh, great. And she speaks this one dialect that is spoken in Guatemala because most of their immigrant population is from Guatemala. So for those survivors, Spanish is their second language. So let's add on top of that, let's add English to the mix. So when we're put in the position of having to report immediately, what we're doing is building barriers around a survivor ability to receive services in a fair, effective, and safe way. I guess what we advocate for is that victim advocates are not mandatory reporters. Again, Trace, I think your clarification was great. Like, we're not taking away, like you don't report. No, like you don't have to report immediately. We want to empower survivors, and this is the practice that we encourage programs to have, to report themselves with the support of an advocate by them whenever possible. But I think,
Soledad, can I jump in? And
of course.
I'm just looking at our time. I want to get
sorry.
on
Yeah.
2 things. No, you're good. This is great. I just want to, I'm getting clear on kind of 2 things here. And then I want to make sure that we're answering questions and kind of having folks bat around a little bit what's in their brains. So, you know, there's the 2 things. There's one is like, you're saying, yes, we are asking that victim advocates are not mandatory reporters, which is the overlap with Anastasia. But you're also mentioning that, and I'm guessing this is like an if you do have to still report, we would ask that the immediately piece be redefined. So it's kind of like, if this one's not possible, then this would be kind of like where we would be asking for maybe more of a middle ground, which is in the immediacy piece. Is that right?
Yeah.
But like your first request is that you're not mandatory reporters, that you would fall in this kind of broader victim advocate piece. But because really in your particular instance, it's the immediacy piece that makes it difficult. Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up to folks, like so with those kind of 2 pieces in mind, being the real thing that we're kind of wrestling around here as it relates to, again, the victim advocacy piece. And obviously you can see where this kind of overlaps and whatnot, regardless of like which victims we are specifically talking about. But in this case, specifically in the domestic violence situation, curious what folks are like. What are your reactions? What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? What do you like about what we're talking about? What do you not like? We've got about 10 minutes before the other group comes back, so. Jessica Daughter, thanks. I was actually calling on you before you raised your hand, so that's.
No, you weren't.
Yeah, I was gonna be like, okay, kick us off.
I always do.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. You know, like I said, I completely like kind
Which
of
part?
There's I like the idea of recommendations for having a delayed time frame, not immediately, but within 24 to 48 hours. I I think we've already, as a larger group, it seemed like talked about that most people agreed that immediately was a bad term, that it didn't make sense for a large number of our mandatory reporters with teachers, nurses, doctors, all sorts of folks, that, you know, giving a time frame to engage in safety planning made a lot of sense. So to me, having that delayed ability to report, I think makes sense. I think it's probably clear, right, from my last comments, I have a lot more hesitation with victim advocates being removed from the sphere completely. But with that being said, right, I think that what Soledad and what Anastasia said earlier, which I think crosses over into this, especially about the immigrant population really having extra struggles with safety planning, protection orders, fears, and just a lot more, obviously, difficulties in getting support in a timely manner, if at all, and feeling comfortable, makes a lot of sense. It's specific to consider our Colorado population and the people that we serve. So I'm in agreement with, I think, all of the reasons, why we should consider this. And I think they're, valid and make sense to me, that we can still find that balance of ensuring public safety while really taking a much more educated and thoughtful look at what, especially domestic violence and stalking victims go through in their cases. And I think the more that we can make this fine-tuned to what our survivors are actually experiencing, like we have been working through this whole task force, rather than just saying, okay, mandatory reporting, let's, keep it as is. Like, we're here to challenge that and to really dive deep into understanding what could make it better while still balancing the public safety. And to me, I do think that can be achieved in a way like Soledad was suggesting, with recognitions of timeframes being extended in order to achieve some of the necessary things that could really help the people suffering the abuse.
So let me get specific then. So Jessica said, all right, like 24 to 48 hours. Let's say, for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to go on the high side to 48 hours. So that, is that an interesting policy piece there? Is 48 hours like an unnecessary time crunch from your perspective? Or are you like, no, we're asking for 72 hours or not? Like, what are we, you know what I mean? Like, what are you asking for if it were to be on the side of the changing the immediacy piece?
Yeah.
So
of course, the first thing is, let's take DV advocates out. That will be my first request. Then
I got you on that.
Yeah, that's no, but I think 48 to 72 hours will be great. I mean, and 72 hours is ideal to get things in place. And I'm thinking interpreters, try to get a protection order served, provide, not just create a safety plan, but take the first steps to move on that safety planning. I want to go to my mom's, I want to travel, I want to, and for everything that we can provide as advocates and community-based organizations, we need time. For example, we could put someone on a flight to California to their parents, but we need to make a request to COVA. COVA needs to approve it. Then we get the money, then we buy the ticket. So that takes time. So I think 48 to 72 hours works. 24 is still a crunch.
Jessica, 72. What are your concerns of, like, well, now this is just a public safety I'm just trying to get it, what are the, we don't have to get to that decision point obviously today, or say that is the recommendation of this group, but I just want to, I'm guessing, Jessica, from your point, it's a public safety thing. So 48 hour to 72 might increase the chances, but anything we're not thinking of there.
Right. I think you're kind of spot on. Like Soledad said, if somebody's arrested, they could be bonded out that afternoon. If they're arrested in the morning, I think for the most part, they can get put onto usually a 1:30 or a 1 p.m. Bonding docket. But, and so there's, and 100%, I think most domestic violence survivors have that fear, that and legitimate fear that when the person gets bonded, there's gonna be retaliation. And 72, I think it's a little bit pinch and pennies, like where that's not the right term, but there's something with money that's like that, where it's like maybe we're a little in the weeds, but I don't think I have a huge objection to 72, maybe, with language too. And I'd be interested in what some of the other mandatory reporters on here think, with language about, catch-alls for significant, safety concerns. But I guess that's the hard part, right? It's like, how do you plan for safety while still having those immediate or imminent dangers?
Let me pause you there. I'm just looking at our time crunch. So yeah, that's definitely an in the weeds question. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't something like your point about 15 was because this is the way the law is written around. So I just want to make sure we weren't missing something obvious around like what your suggestion was there. So sounds kind of like you're like, yeah, okay, let's just talk realistically. What would that look like? Stephanie, I'm guessing your hand is raised specifically about this point, and Kelly, I don't want to miss you either, but Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think my concern, for those, I mean, I'm a former prosecutor as well. I've had Jessica's job for many years in my past. And so sure, I have a bent towards wanting more reports on child abuse. So that's my first piece. I am aware of that bias, but I think where I really struggle is the disproportionate impact of this law. So, I mean, I've known lots of domestic violence victims who never had to rely on community-based programs. They had resources, they had credit cards, right? And so what's interesting to me is that as we consider the total group of people that this impacts, it feels like there's a disproportionate impact on those families, those parents who don't have resources and end up in community organizations, whereas many people can go to their best friend, they can borrow money, right? It never becomes a system problem. Why? Because, as our friend Jill Cohen would talk about, parents have the rights to raise their children without government interference, typically. I mean, that is a constitutional right. And that doesn't say you can harm your children, but it does say that if they are in danger, you do have the right to figure out what those solutions are going to be for you and your children and act accordingly without government interference. So I struggle because I do think that if we don't address disproportionality of who is accessing these services, and as Soledad has talked about, our immigrant and communities who I'm going to suspect do not have resources in the same proportion as others, I'm struggling and with that, and it makes me uneasy, right? We're not walking into every suburbanite's home, right? And saying, if you're a domestic violence victim and you make a report of child neglect or abuse, we're calling you in. So I just think we have to consider that as well. I'm just always struck by how many instances in my professional career I have seen families with tremendous resources who never get on anyone's radar. Period. I mean, they just don't. They get their own substance abuse treatment. They hire their own counselors. So I'm struggling with that aspect of this issue as well.
Stephanie, I just want to make sure I'm clear on, so I hear what your concerns are. So what's your so what there? So so this means, and I know this isn't well baked, but so what, what are you saying then?
So what is I am starting to kind of understand the advocates' arguments today, which is these laws cause problems for victims trying to seek safety. And if that's the case, I think I have to consider that much differently than I did perhaps when I walked into this conversation, a few months ago.
Thanks, Stephanie. Kelly, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. And I think Stephanie gave me more or a better focus of what I was trying to put together in my mind, which is, I think, we do have this narrative that somehow the state and or law enforcement is going to be the best protector of our children, when in fact, if at all, we can do whatever we can to allow the family to really be wrapped around with services and supports, to be the healer, to be the protector, as much as possible. I think that's, that to me, that's what Soledad and Anastasia, as they're talking about it, is that's the main thing, is how do we help our families to be the healers, to be the protectors without state intervention. And how do we do that, whether it's, giving them more time, the 72-hour thing, or whether it's looking at ages of children. Like the main thing is, how do we help our families to be, to be the main protectors and healers. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I really appreciate those comments. Anybody else, where we're kind of in a wrap up place here? So just any other final thoughts of what are either what you're wrestling with? Like, Stephanie, really appreciate your point of just like, this is just making me think a little differently here. And obviously we got to keep talking about how those thoughts are. So we've got the time and continued group conversations here, but any other kind of closing thoughts from folks on the task force side before I kind of, Anastasia and Soledad, just kind of give you a chance to wrap us up? Any other comments? Kathy, I'm going to pick on you because I haven't heard from you lately. But what's in your brain?
Well, I think
Like 1 minute.
Yeah, no worries. I think I really echo what Stephanie said, right? I mean, I think as someone who thinks about, primarily I'm thinking about what's best for how do we protect kids, right? And hearing, very clearly, even when someone is trying to do that in the way that they have accessible to them, these sort of things put barriers. I think the only thing I would think of is, and I would assume that this is the case, right? It doesn't preclude them from reporting if someone comes in, seeks services, and then walks out, right? Because we know how challenging these cycles are. We know how challenging these pressures are. So maybe some education around, even though someone has maybe sought some resources, if there's still a concern that someone may be at risk in that moment, that waiting period may not be appropriate in every case. So, but I agree with what Stephanie said. So it's been a really enlightening and valuable conversation. So I really appreciate the presenters.
Thanks, Kathy. Kevin, what's in your brain? I always appreciate I can get you talking.
I agree with Kathy and Soledad and Anastasia too. I think like just from my own bias, really, anytime we can put the control in the person who's impacted and affected by it, the better. That those folks be the ones who have the opportunity to make their decision about what to do with that information and how to handle it. And I understand their request for the exemption and appreciate that. I just say, from my kind of base of people that I work with, the majority of the people that I work with are prior victims too, and almost entirely disproportionately affected. So I would 100% support them.
Thanks, Kevin. And Jill, if you're able, would love for you to just give a little voice. It's a pretty, I'm loving just, that you got a statement there. So are you able? I know your Wi-Fi is kind of.
I don't know if you'll be able to hear me consistently, but definitely not the camera. That was not working. I feel for folks who dedicate their professional lives to advocating for this population, and they have a really specialized area of expertise. And if you've heard anything, and I'm sure we've talked about mandatory supporting, I mean, they're literally in the position of helping the person. And it's almost like, let me stop helping you for a minute to go do this other thing I have to do in a timely fashion, or else I'm going to get in trouble for not doing it. And here's what I'm doing. Oh, and it's inviting somebody to knock on your door. And now the person that you're worried about harming you is probably gonna definitely know that that's happening. And then that person just might not come back. And I've seen that happen. I've had people say, I'm not going to go back for the help. I'm not going to follow through on the safety plan because the person helping me is inviting all these players into my life that now I have to navigate, right? Like you're already having to navigate your finances and your physical safety and your children's safety. And are they going to school? And are you calling the school to tell them what's happening? And is the school going to call the case in? And all that is out of your control. But the one thing in your control could be this one relationship you have with this person who's an expert in this area and can walk you through the process. And then later, you know, once you get through the crisis, okay, what do we need to do to make sure your family is safe in the long run? Is this a situation where we need to be in touch with law enforcement? Is this a situation where we need to be in touch with the child welfare system to protect you and your child? And I think I just liked having the discretion in the hands of the experts. Because I just want people to seek them out. I'm worried that they will not seek them out. And for me, that's just very important. So anyway, that's me, and I appreciate like how passionate Soledad and Anastasia are, and a lot of people in this field do have some personal experience for themselves or their family members, and so I just really feel like that and their professional experience is just really, really compelling to me. And then I see other states do it. And so I'm just very comfortable with us, many people, many of us are mandated reporters. It's okay if a few people are not mandated reporters.
Thanks, Jill. All right. Any other comments from task force members? Soledad, Anastasia, our other group is waiting to come back to close out the meeting. So I'm not, actually, let me say this. Task force members, if you have any other thoughts, purposes of a well-rounded, just kind of where you're sitting, please drop those in the chat real quick. But Anastasia and Soledad, going to give you each 30 seconds. What's your kind of final thought here for us that you want us to really be taken away from kind of where you sit as we kind of head to our next meeting?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So the consequences of where we are today is people are stop people from seeking help, challenges safety planning, escalate violence when an abuser is warned by a CPS worker of the situation. That is exacerbated if there are guns in the house. There are inherent disparities for survivors of color and traditionally marginalized community, where often the majority of people that engage in services. And I want to say something to Jessica's daughter's earlier point, that I think that the work of building trust between a survivor and law enforcement should be on us, community-based organizations and law enforcement agencies, not on the shoulders of survivors. So if there's anything, we need to work harder to help build that, and we need to create ways of getting to that point, but that shouldn't be placed in the shoulders of the people that are impacted. So that's my, hopefully, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Soledad. Anastasia.
Thank you, Soleil. Just to add to that, just to reiterate, number one, our request is to exempt advocates from mandatory reporting. Two, I think just to kind of come back to it, our current statutes and how they are really, to Soleil's point in our discussion, really can discourage specifically adolescent survivors from coming forward and seeking services, which can have a significant negative long-term impact on their mental health, their physical health, and their long-term outcomes. And three, that we are already providing autonomy for youth in different areas, such as mental health and reproductive health. And doing something like this would be in line with that. I'm really excited to hear that the group is willing to discuss having discretion with specific age groups. And even though I'm not in this space next time, I hope that that conversation will continue to come up because I think that that is a big opportunity to make a meaningful change for a really at-risk population that has a higher rate of sexual violence.
All right. Well, thank you to so much. What an incredibly rich discussion. Really appreciate the thought and preparation you both put into being here today and letting us kind of push and pull on your thinking. And it's no small task to step into a task force that's been meeting for 18 months, as Stephanie said, and hit the ground with us running. So thank you for that. I know there's a lot of gratitude from the members here as well. I'm going to let the other group back in. We just have a quick closeout with everything to make sure we don't have any public comment, and then we'll close out. So thanks again. And if you all are willing to share your contact information, we'd love for you to drop in your emails into the chat if folks do have questions or follow up. And I'm sure that we will follow up in future meetings as well, both with Gina and Roshan as well. So thanks again, y'all. And I'm going to let folks back in. All right. Thanks to the other group for your patience. We were having a really great discussion, as I'm sure you were, and just needed to have some wrap up thoughts. So real quick, I have not seen a request, and I'm not sure I see any members of the public that would like to provide public comment, but I did want to put that out there. Please put a note in the chat or come off mute if you'd like to provide any closing thoughts or public comments. Okay, seeing none. We are wrapping up with our subcommittee phase 2 meeting 1 today. We'll be back on June, oh boy, 26th. And I see Brian with his hands up, one hand. Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, that was a classic direct message intention, general message application. Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing. I know Kevin had put in the chat a question about the resources prior, and I wasn't able to answer them before I jumped over. We don't have any current plans to update the resource, but for each of the resources, we mark when research was completed. So for the broad majority of it, that research was completed by December 2023. And then for the new information about occupations and exemptions, that research was completed by April 2024. And I also just wanted to say, please feel free to share this as widely as you'd like. We're really excited for this to not only be useful information for the task force, but to be used by anyone across the country who has interest in these policy questions. So please feel free to put this out there as much as possible. And I'm always happy to talk any specific details, or you can send people to me for more information.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. All right. Stephanie, close us out and we'll send folks on their way.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here today. We had some very thoughtful conversations. I want to thank our speakers who joined us. I also want to thank you, Trace. You facilitated a great conversation, and Doris, I'm sure you did the same in your group. And I'd be remiss if I did not thank Brian. The research you have in your hands takes hours and days and weeks, and he does it adeptly and thoroughly and efficiently. And Brian, just thank you, because this really allows us to have far greater informed conversations, which is super important to a good product. So just thank you. And otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing everybody next.
All right. Thanks so much, y'all. June 26th, we will see you back here. Special thanks again to our guests today, and y'all have a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care.